In Westbridge, every notification carries a story. A simple message can change a life. And sometimes, love begins beyond the screen. He thought she was a catfish in Westbridge until she showed up at his door. It was the kind of rain that makes the town feel smaller, like someone was quietly folding Westbridge into the palm of their hand. Water ran off the eaves in even streams. Streetlights smeared halos across wet pavement. Inside, Adam Brooks moved through the low hum of his house as if he were keeping time with a small, careful clock. Check the nightlight by Sophie's bed. Tuck the blanket. Make sure the stuffed rabbit lay against her cheek. Sophie breathed soft and even, thumb at the corner of her mouth. His world fit inside the edges of that bed and the worn sweatshirt he kept on the back of a kitchen chair. The knock came at 2 in the morning, sharp and too polite for the hour. Adam's first thought was someone who'd taken a wrong turn on Chestnut Avenue. He wiped his hands on his jeans and opened the door without a chain. Habit more than bravery. Rain plastered a woman to his porch, her hair clinging in dark strings to the collar of a coat that had seen better days. She held her hands together like they could be warmed by being near each other. A towel was wrapped around her shoulders. The ends fluttered in the wind. She looked like a photograph taken in movement. A face that had been posed for cameras at one time, perhaps, but now softened by exhaustion, by a hunger for ordinary shelter. A name, like an unfamiliar song, nudged at the edge of Adam's memory. He'd seen the name on a Westbridge message board a few weeks back. Someone posting about a woman asking for anonymity. A lady whose photos had once been part of articles about galas and charity dinners. Town gossip was its own economy. Names moved through it like coin. People had speculated online. Was she for real? Was this some elaborate stunt? Catfish, someone had typed with a teeth clench emoji. Adam didn't know the woman's name then. He only knew a child's breathing in the next room, and trust had to be measured. He stepped back a little, letting the porch light cut a narrow island of warmth between them. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was even. The woman looked at him like someone who had been rehearsing an answer and misplaced the right words. I'm sorry to bother you," she said, the vowels a soft, careful thing. "My phone died. I don't have anywhere to go, please, just for the night." Her voice didn't carry a claim or a hint of performance. It carried only the thing she needed. Adam hesitated less for himself and more for Sophie. He listened for the smallness of the risk in the woman's tone. People in Westbridge sometimes came to the Brooks house looking for towels, or directions, or a cup of sugar. This felt different. He thought about the message threads, the little fires of rumour, pictures stitched into stories, stories stitched into fears. The word catfish slid under his skin like a splinter, but the word didn't tell him the precise weight of human hands. He opened the door wider. "Okay," he said. "You can come in. Quiet though. The kid's asleep." She nodded, relief folding her shoulders down. She moved through his house like water, finding the path of least resistance. Slow, grateful. Adam closed the door behind them and felt the damp leave with her. She removed the towel and handed it back like it wasn't valuable. Up close, the woman smelled like wet wool and soap, and something faintly floral, like a perfume bottle hiding in a dresser drawer. "There's a blanket in the linen closet," Adam said. "Hayden," he coughed. "Mrs. Johnson brings over coffee sometimes. She has more blankets if you need." It came out practical, unadorned. He set the kettle on the stove. Habit insisted. Check the locks. Check the windows. He walked past the living room to make sure Sophie hadn't stirred. The woman's eyes found Sophie's bed through the dim. For a second, she looked like someone seeing a private thing, a small jewel. Her mouth made a sound that was almost a smile, and then she turned away, stepping as if to obey the house's mute rules. "Thank you," she whispered. And the words felt too small for the magnitude of what she'd asked. He showed her the couch, fresh pillowcase from the top of the linen closet. The towel around her shoulders became a shawl. Adam left the porch light on, because leaving a light off seemed like denying help a path. She left a note on the kitchen table, a slanted quick thing written in ballpoint. "Extra blankets on the couch. Please, keep quiet." She didn't sign it. No one in Westbridge would have guessed her handwriting for anything else. They sat with the ordinary sounds of a house at night, the kettle's tiny shriek as it boiled, the low tap of rain at the windows, Sophie's small breaths like a lullaby. The woman folded her hands around a mug Adam had filled with tea and stared into it as if it could show her the map of the morning. Adam didn't ask for her name. He resisted filling the silence with idle questions that might turn an exhaustion into interrogation. He offered instead what his life could spare: a sweatshirt from the back of his chair, a pair of slippers by the door, the privacy of an unasked-for bed. She accepted everything with a quiet gratitude that suggested she had been given fewer of those things than was fair. When Sophie stirred, a stretch and a murmured name, Adam felt the pivot of the night. Protect. Always protect. The woman moved, carefully, not to wake her. She smiled, something small, almost undone by the room's dimness, and Sophie blinked awake to see a stranger. "Who's that?" Sophie asked, voice sleepy, the corners of her mouth yet to commit to any particular thought. "Someone who needed a blanket," Adam said, crouching down to bring himself to Sophie's height. "She's just staying for the night, okay? Mrs. Johnson will be back in the morning." The words tacked certainty to an uncertain thing. Sophie considered the woman with the slow, deliberate curiosity of a 6-year-old, and then decided she liked the rabbit embroidery on the stranger's worn sleeve. She reached out a small hand. "Do you like rabbits?" she asked. The woman's face softened in a way that softened Adam. "I love rabbits," she said. "I used to have a stuffed bunny named Button. He lost an ear, but he still sat up on my shelf." Sophie giggled and, in the way children grant trust so easily, offered the name of an imaginary friend. "This is Sophie. She says Button is brave." The woman laughed, a sound like a small bell. "Tell Button I said hello." Adam watched them. Warmth didn't come only from blankets. It came from these small exchanges, the economy of tiny kindnesses that cost nothing and balanced the household. He felt the familiar ache of being the man who kept everything in its lane. Bills, bedtime stories, appointments at the dentist. He liked the rhythm of simple duties. Tonight, his main job was to be steady, to make sure nothing outside this house upset the calm. What do you think happens next? Comment your prediction before we continue. The kettle clicked off. Outside, the rain slowed. Garage doors sighed as neighbours shut out the night. Westbridge slept with one eye open. Even the old radio in the diner hummed a quiet apologetic for the storm. Still, somewhere in Adam's mind, the town's internet murmurs kept replaying. He had read the comment threads that named the woman, if she was who the post said she was, like a headline that didn't fit into the shape of the person on his couch. Image and reality were two different currencies. After Sophie fell asleep again, the woman sat up on the couch and smoothed the Afghan over her knees. She accepted the sweatshirt Adam offered, shoved her long legs into the slippers, and for the first time she relaxed enough to let an annoyance slip free. "There's a laundromat 2 blocks down that opens early," Adam said at last. "Mrs. Dorsey runs it. She won't ask questions if you need to pass a day there." "Thank you," the woman murmured. She lifted the sweatshirt's collar to her chin as if it were armour against more than the cold. Adam thought of the online rumour, an unverified photograph, a thin rumour about a woman stepping away from a life of curated perfection, and decided he would not act like a town hatchet. Still, the word catfish kept nudging. The town had a way of turning people into stories, and then pitching those stories around until someone else believed them. He was not inclined to be the next person to throw a story. If you love real-feeling stories of second chances, tap like and subscribe. By morning, the rain had become a polite drizzle that brushed the town in a sheen. Westbridge looked more sensible in daylight. The bakery's sign blinked awake. The diner put out extra chairs, and a newspaper folded under a proprietor's arm made its slow rounds. Mrs. Dorsey's laundromat was a square of sagging neon and the constant rumble of machines. It smelled, as laundromats do, of detergent and warm cotton and the faint ghost of bleach. Freshly dried sheets lined a few racks. A radio played country songs low and steady. The woman moved through the laundromat like someone learning to take up a different kind of space. She put coins into the machines with precise fingers, separated colors with a concentration that seemed almost sacred. No cameras watched. No one took her picture. Mrs. Dorsey nodded at her, like at someone who had earned a nod through simple decency. "You're new around here, aren't you, dear?" Mrs. Dorsey asked, folding a shirt with practiced flat palms. "Yeah," the woman said. "Just passing through, I guess." "You passing through long?" Mrs. Dorsey asked. Her tone was the town's default, interested, mildly territorial. "Not sure yet," she answered, thinking about staying a little while. Mrs. Dorsey grunted the kind of sound that meant she knew exactly what staying a little while could mean. "Well, you keep your head down and keep your quarters ready. Folks in Westbridge have enough to do besides nose about someone else's life." The woman smiled, and for the first time, allowed a little warmth to reach her face as she spoke of learning the machines. "They sound like thunder when they spin," she said, watching the drum turn. Sophie came into the laundromat a short while later, hand in hand with Mrs. Johnson, who had brought muffins and more blankets, as if the town were a hand-off chain of kindness. Sophie marched in like a commander, taking note of the machines and the rows of folding tables. "Mum says you get to learn folding clothes," Sophie announced to the woman, as if issuing a royal decree. "You have to fold the towels like this." She demonstrated, the efficiency of small hands practiced and proud. The woman knelt to Sophie's level and took the towel. "Show me," she said. She fumbled at first, doubling the towel unevenly, but Sophie guided her fingers, and the two of them laughed when they couldn't quite get the corners to meet. There was a softness in the way the woman moved with Sophie. No agenda, no posing, only a genuine curiosity that made the child beam. Adam watched from across the laundromat, folding a shirt he had been meaning to repair for weeks, the threadbare seam a kind of domestic map of the past year. He sensed the town's eyes rest and move elsewhere. For the first time since the knock on his door, he allowed himself the thought that perhaps the woman wanted what small-town people wanted: anonymity, a chance to be ordinary. He felt an odd sting of relief. Then the glass at the front of the laundromat flashed. It started with a small glare, just a reflection at first. But then a camera's shutter clicked, crisp and intrusive, and a bright rectangle of light licked across someone's sleeve. For a second he thought it was just a tourist taking a picture of the machines. Then a man's voice called, thinly eager, "Miss Whitmore? Linda Whitmore?" The name landed like an anchor. The woman's jaw tightened almost painlessly. Adam felt a coldness move through his body, the kind that folds a tissue in the same place again and again. "Please," she said quietly, turning toward the door but not moving. Her face arranged itself, composed, hands folded, as if she were hoping to make herself too small for anyone's attention. The photographer took another picture. His phone screen flashed the same name. Westbridge rumour had been wrong about nothing. The woman they'd been speculating about had a public identity, one that came with a history of carefully curated images and articles. The man in the doorway spoke louder this time, as if volume could make the world yield more details. "It's you. Are you going to answer? What's going on here? People want to know." "Can you please?" the woman began. She sounded tired in a way that cleared her of any performance. Adam's hands tightened on the shirt he'd been folding. His ribs held a pressure that asked him to do something simple and absolute. Protect the small, quiet life inside the laundromat. The child's softness and two people's attempt to breathe. "Hey." His voice was low when he stepped between the woman and the doorway. He kept his shoulders broad but not aggressive. "We don't need this here. My daughter is here." He said it without rhetorical flourish. The man with the phone hesitated, still hungry for a scoop. He took another picture, which made the fluorescent lights stutter and Sophie blink. Mrs. Dorsey put a hand on the shoulder of the photographer, as one might touch a neighbour to remind them of decency. "You can't just come in here and—" Adam started. He didn't intend to sound threatening. He intended to be a buffer. The man shrugged, the kind of shrug that couldn't see children. "Names are public," the man said. "She's an adult. She's in public. She's in a place where people are doing laundry, and that's enough. You can take your pictures outside, Adam said. His voice had the particular authority of someone who didn't shout but refused to be ignored. He put his hand on Sophie's shoulder. Kids don't need to be part of headlines. The photographer's fingers hesitated. He took a step back and muttered about clicks and outtakes, but the air had changed. In that pause, the woman moved not toward further conversation, but toward the washing machines. She turned the drum with a practiced touch, as if a normal task grounded her more than explanations could. Sophie pressed a wet hand to the glass and watched the clothes spin in circles. The incident did not explode into a scandal. It was too small for that, but it had the necessary edges to cut. Westbridge would not need to hear the whole story to begin telling it. People love the shape of a story, even when they only have half a frame. After the photographer left, making an odor of disappointment behind him, Adam found a pocket of street that felt safer and sat with the woman on the bench outside the laundromat. The drizzle had returned, but the bench kept them warm enough. "How long have you been out there?" he asked, careful. She shrugged. "A few nights. I moved from place to place. I was trying to be small." She looked at her hands, the size of them, the length of her fingers. "It's harder when someone keeps expecting a photograph." Adam nodded. He had an understanding of small, of keeping a house that didn't showcase everything, of ironing shirts to make a Sunday count. He had no real map for a life that included magazines and invitations and cameramen. Still, he felt something like compassion loosen in him. People fled things all the time. Bad jobs, bad relationships, the slow death of someone's sense of self. Westbridge gathered them up like collections on a porch, willing to hold, but not to cling. "Do you have family here?" Adam asked. The question was practical. It wasn't a full inquiry into allegiances. He wanted to know if she had a place to go that wouldn't bring lights and lenses. "No," she said. "Not really. I have a father, but—" Her mouth tightened for a second and then softened. "He'll find me if he wants to. He always does." The name didn't come then, but the implication folded neatly into place. People who had been used to being watched were sometimes also used to being controlled. Adam saw the tilt of the woman's shoulders and the way she kept her eyes lowered when she spoke about family. "You could stay here a little while," he offered. "If you want. We've got space for an extra pillow. Mrs. Johnson can make you breakfast. We mind our own, but we mind each other too." She looked at him then with an expression that seemed to measure whether his offer could be trusted. "Why would you help someone you don't know?" she asked. Not a challenge, but a quiet curiosity about the economy of small-town favors. "Because it's not that hard," he said simply. "My daughter's asleep. I like my house to be a safe place." He thought of the times his own life had been a refuge. His mother on his couch for a week after the funeral, a neighbor who'd left casseroles when his own kitchen was too sad to face. He'd been given shelter in different forms. It was not heroic. It was human. She closed her eyes for a moment, a little grate of a sound escaping her, and then nodded. "All right, thank you." The days that followed moved at the pace of ordinary things. The rain kept some rhythm in the background. Mornings became eggs over a stove that had seen too many quick breakfasts. Burnt toast happened once. Sophie was in charge of buttering and, distracted by a rabbit drawing she was making, left the bread too long under the broiler. The top of it blackened like a misstep in a sentence. The smoke alarm chirped, a single, indignant note. Adam cursed softly and opened the window to let the smell out. The woman, Linda, a name she finally let him use, blotted at the toast and laughed with Sophie about making rock toast, a special recipe. It was in the small mistakes, the charred bread and the crooked picture frames, that Linda loosened. She learned the rhythm of laundry detergent measured with the corner of a spoon. Mrs. Dorsey taught her the trick of not overloading the dryer. She learned to fold towels in a neat stack, to tuck corner to corner, a small geometry of mundanity. She watched Sophie make a fort out of dining chairs and told the child a story about a rabbit who traded places with a fox for one day and decided it liked being ordinary better. "Do you miss it?" Adam asked once, as Linda sat at the kitchen table knitting something small and uneven. A scarf, perhaps, or a first attempt at repair. His voice was careful. The question wasn't a demand. It was the shape of an offering. She looked up, a shadow passing the face like cloud over sun. Sometimes, she admitted. There are things you miss even when you wanted to leave them. There are good things that got tangled with other things. Being noticed has its conveniences. It has the price of always being someone else's story. He didn't press. He had no intention of making her account into a public confession. He made coffee instead, poured it for both of them, and watched her breathe in the smell like someone savoring a remembered small comfort. She had a necklace, thin and discreet, that she wore under her shirt. It glinted when she leaned over the table. Adam had never been one to pry beyond the visible. One afternoon, at the laundromat, a dryer door flung too quickly and a small metal thing clinked on the tile. Linda bent to pick it up. The necklace, small and delicate, had slipped free of its clasp and lay on the floor like a modest spill of starlight. The chain looked expensive. No gaudy flash, only the precise weight of something that had been chosen carefully. It had a pendant the shape of a small key. She froze for a breath, cheeks bleeding a faint pink. "Oh," she said, and her hands covered the pendant as if she could press it back into herself. Her fingers trembled. Adam was at her side almost before his mind had fully registered the movement. He knelt and picked the necklace up with a near-official gentleness. "It's pretty," Sophie said, wide-eyed. She wasn't aware of the necklace's implied history. She only saw something pretty and cool. Linda swallowed. "It was given to me a long time ago," she said, voice almost too steady. "It doesn't mean much now." The laundromat held its ordinary hum. The machines indifferent. Mrs. Dorsey kept folding shirts like nothing in the world could interrupt the gravity of a well-made bed. But Linda's necklace had a gravity too. Objects have a way of carrying the stories people don't say. "Things have a way of following you," Adam said softly. He sat back on his heels and met her eyes. "You don't have to explain. You don't have to tell me who you were. Just who you are here. Who you are now." Her throat worked. For a moment her face was all private weather. Then she let the truth spill in a small, careful line. "I had a life where everything was arranged," she said. "Clothes had names. Applause was measured. People expected me to be the same painting over and over." She laughed, not a happy sound. "I wanted to be a person who didn't have a team to tuck her in. I wanted to make a sandwich myself." Adam listened. She didn't speak as if she sought pity or applause. She spoke as if she were reporting facts, the way someone might explain a trip she'd taken. He found himself thinking about the simplicity of the ways in which people rebuilt themselves, through a small set of skills, through the ceremony of making a bed, through learning to fold a towel so the corners met. "You left it," Sophie said, matter of fact. "That's brave." The simplicity of the child's verdict hit Linda like a small, honest thing. The necklace rested for a moment on Adam's palm. It looked older than the woman who'd walked into his house in the rain, but not so old that it didn't belong to her. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her coat, a sound Adam had not heard in days. It felt intrusive, the same way pictures had been. She slid her hand into her pocket and saw a message that made her whole body shift. "He found me," the text might as well have said. The three-line tautness of a man who never gave up. She did not read it out loud. Her face closed like a book. There was a soundless exchange of decisions happening in the room, a weighing of what staying might cost the man who had given her a couch and a sleeping daughter, what it might cost a small life to be pulled into a larger one. In Westbridge, words have weight. So do images. Something else, media, money, carried weight too. Adam felt it settle like a shadow at the edge of the laundromat. "Is everything all right?" he asked. She looked up at him with an expression that had been shaped by late-night choices and early morning breath. "I should go," she said, and it was quiet enough that the tumble of a dryer might have swallowed it whole. "No," Adam said, firmer than he expected. "You're safe here for now. We'll figure it out." She shook her head. If he finds me here, it won't just be me. It'll be you. It will be Sophie. Her voice was steady. I can't do that to you. I can't drag you into whatever that is. The laundromat's noise rose and fell like surf. Mrs. Dorsey glanced up with a practiced look that asked no false questions. People who had lived long enough to fold other people's shirts could read sorrow in the set of a jaw. Adam thought of his daughter's laughter, of Sophie making forts and calling strangers brave if they learned to fold towels. He imagined the slow rot of his small life being photographed and reposted, of strangers lining up outside his house with cameras and shrill curiosity. The thought tightened something in him. We don't know that, he said, soft. We don't have to let them write our story. We can... He looked at Sophie, asleep in the back seat of Mrs. Johnson's car while she waited to help him with errands. We can keep living. Linda's mouth quivered. Then she smiled at him like a thing given reluctantly. That's noble, she said with no malice, only a tenderness that made him want to be less practical and more brave. They left the laundromat under a sky that threatened more rain, a caution in the air. They moved through the town like two people carrying a fragile secret cargo. Westbridge was only a few streets of clapboard and a hardware store that sold nails by weight and a methadone clinic tucked politely behind a grocery store. It was a place where the name of a person became a shared property very quickly. News didn't need helicopters. A photograph and a question were enough. The trouble arrived in the form of a car. Black, too polished for Westbridge's unvarnished habits. It paused at the curb like an intrusion. For a beat, nothing happened. Then a man stepped out with a face that had been taught how to make restraint look like authority. He was not a caricature of power, but rather its practiced, quiet form. He wore a coat that cost more than Adam's truck. He carried himself with an ease that comes when doors open for you and people step aside. Linda! The man's voice sounded practiced too, measured, as if he had been rehearsing the moment he would call her name aloud and reclaim his place. Linda's hand went to the necklace for a heartbeat. Then she relaxed it and let her fingers fall to rest. She swallowed, an almost invisible mechanism of acceptance. She had known from the first that avoiding power was temporary. She had known control had a way of tracking those who stepped away from it. Don't, Adam said before he could stop himself. He stepped forward. Sophie had been brought back into town with Mrs. Johnson, who hovered like a sentinel nearby, and Adam was conscious of the child's smallness in the face of grown decisions. He felt the town breathing around them. Neighbours had come to the edge of doorways to see what would happen. The man in the coat regarded Adam with the sort of look that considered how he might be inconvenient. You should let Ms. Whitmore handle this, he said with a mildness that was also a command. You're a young man with responsibilities. This is between family. She's not your property, Adam said, answering the insult of the implication. His voice didn't spike, it simply insisted on a fact. If she chooses where to live, that's her business. A small crowd had, without intending to, gathered. Westbridge had a way of making moments communal, an odd side effect of being too intimate a place. Mrs. Dorsey stood in the lint-grey doorway with a towel over her arm like an emblem. Mrs. Johnson kept Sophie close by, her jaw tight with protectiveness. The man in the coat watched all of them with cool interest. It's safer if she comes with me, he said. The tone was one that contained 1,000 arguments dressed as concern. We can handle things quietly. We can protect her. Linda's gaze softened in a way that made Adam's chest ache. For a long moment, she simply looked at the man who likely understood the costs of headlines and the economics of salvage. He stepped closer, words designed to make the world right by the shape of his concern. There was a magnetic quality to the way someone who had been used to commanding rooms could make offers that sounded like kindness. She shook her head a little, the movement small and determined as a child refusing a story they didn't like. I can't, she said. I can't ask them to be safe in that way. I won't make your life, anyone's life. Her voice broke. She swallowed and regained it. I won't let you pull them into that. The man looked at her as one might inspect a misaligned picture frame. You'll ruin the privacy we can create, he said matter-of-factly. as if privacy itself were an estate plan. "I know what you can offer," she replied, voice steady now. "But he's right. I can't." The decision was both simple and enormous. Linda took a breath and turned her face to Adam in a way that made him understand the gravity of what she had held back. "I'll go," she said, and the words carried with them an economy of sacrifice that made the town's air dense. "No," Adam said, his voice cracking despite his best efforts. He put out a hand, an instinct of ownership that had nothing to do with legal right and everything to do with the human cost he felt. "Don't do that. Don't take away what's not yours to take. Sophie." Sophie clutched at his sleeve with fingers that did not yet know what the word sacrifice meant. Adam wanted to protect her from adult complexities that arrived like hard rain. He wanted to hold the moment and not let it break. Linda looked at Sophie and then at Mrs. Johnson, who had been their neighbour for years, who'd baked when Adam had been too tired to cook. Her face lined into a resolve like someone finding their balance on a narrow bridge. "They would be dragged in," she said quietly. "You'd get pictures on your porch. You'd get phone calls. You'd be harassed. I won't do that to you. I can't ask you to bear a storm for me." Adam's hands curled into fists at his sides. He could see, in a kind of slow-motion clarity, how the story would spin outward. The black car, the man's composed patience, the photographer's last image folded into a headline. He imagined Sophie's schoolyard with a rumour and the way children could repeat words they didn't understand. "Then we stay inside," Adam said. "We keep our curtains closed. We refuse to be interesting." "That's not how it works," the man said. He stepped forward now, not loud, but confident. "You can't hide everything, Adam. Sometimes decisions are necessary." The man took Linda's elbow gently, not like a captor, but like someone resigned to the fact of steering a person he considered property into what he considered safety. Linda didn't pull away. She looked at Adam, the steadiness in his face like a promise he had not meant to give. "Thank you," she said, the words barely above breath. "For the blanket, for the breakfast, for Sophie." The tenderness in her voice was like a benediction. She turned, letting the man in the coat lead her to the black car. For an instant, one incandescent second, she looked back. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been regret or gratitude or a collection of both. The rain picked up, an old song that seemed to know the timing for everything. Adam watched the car pull away, the tail lights blurring into red beads in the drizzle. He stood on the porch, the living room light spilling at his feet, Sophie tucked warm and oblivious to the size of adult decisions. The necklace had returned to its place beneath a collar, invisible to the world that only saw headlines and not the soft human economy of small kindnesses. The town returned to its own small preoccupations. The diner filled up, children on their way to school clutched by parents in coats, Mr. Hayes sweeping the stoop of his bookstore with the same rhythmic patience he'd always had. But for Adam, something had shifted. A quiet had settled that was not peace. It was the aftertaste of a choice made by someone else for reasons that resembled both protection and control. He closed the door and double-checked the locks. It felt both necessary and insufficient. Inside, the kettle was cool and the burnt toast sat on the counter like a small, defiant monument. Sophie chewed happily on a muffin Mrs. Johnson had brought. She had no sense of the weight of the afternoon, only a child's confidence that the world existed to be explored. Adam took the necklace from the top drawer where he'd placed it out of a sense of custodial duty and set it beside the toaster. It glittered under the kitchen light, a small secret. He didn't put it away. He didn't know if he was holding it for evidence or for memory. He folded a cloth over the pendant like a small benediction. Outside, the drizzle thinned to a mist that made the porch light bloom. Adam stood for a long minute with his palm flat against the cool wood of the door, the necklace like a small, heavy secret in the drawer behind him. The house smelled of coffee and smoke and the faint sweetness of muffins left by Mrs. Johnson. Inside, the night had resumed its ordinary hush. The house favoured its routine as if that could repel imagined storms. He went about the late chores with a kind of reverence. Wash the dishes that had been abandoned, sweep crumbs from the table, fold Sophie's pyjamas, with an almost ceremonial patience. Routine had always been the way he remembered to breathe. Sophie slept with her thumb tucked behind her ear. The rabbit was tucked into her crook, its one ear neatly mended with a stitch that had been made more than once. Around midnight the house shifted. Sophie stirred, then began to murmur. Adam woke fully to the small, insistent sound of a child's need. He found her forehead hot under his palm. The nightlight's pink glow made her cheeks look flushed, and the edges of the rabbit's face haloed. The temperature prickled under his hand like an electric current. "Mommy," she whispered, the word wandering out as if she were searching for a shape that made sense. Adam's chest tightened. He was all father in an instant, practical, decisive. He bundled blankets, found the thermometer in the drawer with the bandages and children's vitamins, and took her temperature. It was high enough that he moved from concern into something sharper. Fever had a way of taking small things and giving them big consequences. Sophie cried in a way that made Adam's neck hot. He was the kind of man who could solder a loose pipe. But at times like this, he felt inept, letters of instructions slipping from his memory. He called Mrs. Johnson, who was awake and already tying slippers on, and then started the car without thinking of sleep. The drive to Westbridge Medical felt both too short and unbearably long. The town's street lamps smeared into streaks by the rain on the windshield. The emergency waiting room smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. A woman in scrubs took Sophie's vitals with a calm efficiency that steadied Adam like a hand on his shoulder. The nurse's voice was practical and kind. "We'll check for an infection, run a CBC. Make sure it's nothing severe," she said. "If she has fever and isn't eating, we'll admit for observation." Adam signed forms. Paper felt flimsy against the moment. He opened his wallet to find exactly the kind of balance that made his breath short. A few cash bills, a debit card that had seen more careful days, and a pile of unpaid bills tucked like a quiet confession. Hospital rooms are blunt measures of what you owe the world. Adam had always met the town's needs with steady work. He had not planned for sudden medical bills that arrived like stormwater. "Is there someone who can help with payments?" the nurse asked gently, as if offering a hand across the counter rather than issuing an ultimatum. Adam thought of the necklace he had tucked away and the woman who'd left with her father, like a tide pulling away from shore. He imagined the headline that might follow a broken life. He imagined Sophie's schoolyard. He reached for a wallet he didn't have. I'll manage," he said, and heard how small that sounded in the clinical light. The nurse's eyes softened. "Sometimes hospitals can work with you on billing," she said. "But right now, your child needs fluids and monitoring. We can help with that." They put Sophie on a cot in a fluorescent room that smelled of soap and plastic. Her little limbs looked too thin beneath the blanket. Adam sat in a plastic chair and watched the monitors make small, steady beats. He felt entirely out of his depth. That's when the automatic doors sighed open and someone entered the corridor with the muffled, polite assertiveness of a person whose life had been arranged by staffers. It took a moment for him to register the presence, then the practical click of heels, the soft cloth of a jacket, the measured tread of a woman who seemed unwilling to let chaos slide by unnoticed. Linda walked in like someone who had made a decision, and then walked straight toward its consequences. No fanfare, no trailing cameras, just a woman with wet hair pinned back and a face that had both expedition and apology stitched into it. Adam's throat closed at the sight of her. She had the kind of focused calm that comes when someone is used to making things happen, but she also wore the small, open vulnerability of what had been softened by ordinary days. A faded sweatshirt someone had given her, the faint smudge of laundry soap at her wrist. "How is she?" Linda asked before she reached him, as if the question itself could bend time. The nurse looked up, blinking in the fluorescent light. "We're keeping her for observation. Fever's high. We're giving fluids and watching for infection." Adam felt some of his defenses dissolve at seeing her there. He hadn't expected anything, and yet the sight of her, no entourage, no appointed conciliation, moved something in him that rarefied and plain. Gratitude, Suspicion folded into relief. He hadn't known whether she'd find them, whether stepping away from everything had been enough to make her invisible. She had come. "I can help with the bill," Linda said, soft but with the kind of matter-of-factness Adam had seen in the laundromat when she paid for dryers with precise coins. The nurse made a polite murmur of offer, and the paperwork unfolded the way such offers do in hospitals, on clipboards, with details. Adam felt something like a fight between pride and necessity. He had always been the one to handle things, to keep his household's accounts clean with careful arithmetic. Accepting help had been a threshold, a small humility. He looked at Linda, at the way the light caught her damp hair, and then at Sophie, curled thin and vulnerable under the blanket. The decision didn't feel like surrender. It felt like the kind of answer that arrives when two people decide to be for each other. "Okay," he said. Linda slid her card through the machine with hands that were steady, the motion near ritual. There was no statement, no proclamation, just the clean, ordinary fact of payment. A nurse handled the transaction with professional discretion and put the receipt into a folder. When it was done, Linda folded her hands and said, "I didn't come to make a show. I couldn't leave her like that." The remark was small but seismic. It shifted the relation between them from indebtedness to mutual care. Adam could see the cost she'd paid to return, not just money, but the re-exposure to the world she had been trying to escape. Her father might still be out there, arranging salvage, but for this moment she had chosen to stand in the fluorescent light of a hospital and put her money where her conscience sat. "Thank you," Adam said, and the two words looked like something they could both stand on. In the hallway afterward, they did not rehearse the past. There was no need. Words would have been too elaborate for what had happened. Instead, Linda stood with them at Sophie's bedside, watching the monitors, and for once the hospital's white walls felt less like interrogation and more like shelter. She brought with her a small, soft bag of children's books, a couple of titles with dog-eared corners. She sat on the vinyl chair and read aloud in a voice that had been trained for stages and microphones, yet softened into a story just for a little girl in a small bed. Neighbours came by. Mrs. Dorsey slipped in with a thermos of tea. Mrs. Johnson hovered with a look that balanced gratitude and curiosity. The town's habit of care threaded through the corridor like a quiet blessing. It had the effect of flattening some of the edges that headlines might have cut. Outside, the paparazzi's presence thinned. There were always those who would make a profession of other people's moments, but the hospital had a way of enforcing boundaries. Security walked the corridors with a polite firmness. Someone in a grey coat made it clear that inside the building, the child came first. The world of photographs, for once, had to wait. When Sophie slept for a long patch and the monitors sighed steady, Adam and Linda walked slowly down the corridor. They did not make proclamations. They kept to small talk at first, the sort that patches a bridge with planks of ordinary conversation. They spoke about the laundromat's best detergent, about Mrs. Dorsey's trick for removing a stubborn grease stain, about the way Sophie liked her muffins half buttered with jam. "I thought you'd been gone," Adam said finally, not wanting to make the sentence clumsy with accusation or with longing. "When you left with him." Linda's face softened in a way that invited rather than rebuked. "I wanted to be gone," she admitted. "For a while, I thought being out of sight would make me breathe. But leaving wasn't the end of it. It was only a beginning. There was so much I had to untie and be brave enough to keep untying." Adam watched her hands, those same hands that had learned to fold towels and had once been used to arranging place settings on long tables. They had the softness of someone who had softened under both cameras and laundromat lights. He felt, in the corridor's fluorescent hum, a small permission to step closer into a dangerous thing. Hope. "Why did you come back?" he asked, because he wanted the plain truth rather than the poetic answer. Linda paused. Outside, rain had started again, a gentle return. "Because I realized I could choose," she said. "Not everything you left is something you have to go back to. And when a little girl needs help at 2 in the morning, it clarifies what matters." She looked at him with a kind of directness that left him no room for coyness. They stood a while longer, watching the rain run down the hospital windows. It was odd how the same wetness that made them hide earlier now seemed to make the air clean. There was an economy to that truth. Presence clarified priorities, and choices were easier to name when a child was breathing under the nightlight. When Sophie's fever broke the next morning, the monitor's steady beeps seemed to exhale. She was still thin, but the color came back to her cheeks like paint washing back in. She asked for grilled cheese with the fierce certainty of a child who believed fundamentally in the restorative power of comfort food, and Adam promised he would make her one the minute they were home. Linda lingered at the doorway like someone who had been granted permission to stay in a small way. She did not demand to be part of their lives. She simply asked if she could come back to make a grilled cheese as if she were auditioning for a place at their table. "Sure," Adam said. "You're welcome." Or the father, Wittmann, made one last pass through Westbridge not long after, a quiet visit to make arrangements that were less public and more calculated. He spoke with a courtesy that was worn like armor. He asked Linda to come with him, to consider options that protected her image and their mutual interests. She listened politely, acknowledged the lifetime of convenience and control he represented, and then said no. Not with theatrics, with a line of logic more unyielding than drama. "I won't ask anyone to live behind a shield because of me," she told him. "If you want to help, don't make it cost someone else their small life." For a beat, he looked at her as if trying to see what had changed. Then he turned and left, not with fury, but with a measured disappointment. He was not a cartoon villain who vanished from the plot. He was a man who expected arrangements, and was now being asked to accept that his child, his woman, was making different choices. The parting left a residue of consequence, but Linda didn't need the closure of dramatic rupture. The decision had been her self-made, and that was enough. The months that followed were stitched with small shifts. Linda stayed in Westbridge with no fanfare and no plan beyond the next day. She took a job helping at the breakfast stand Adam set up in the small plaza by the river. No glossy brand, just an open window and a sign painted with a child's uneven hand. They called it Brookside Mornings. The stand served eggs done right and coffee that warmed palms and hearts. People lined up for the comfort of something familiar and cheered on the quiet miracle of someone learning to be ordinary. At first, Linda worked the early shift and left when the daylight grew loud, folding napkins and placing slices of orange with a care that made customers take notice. She wore a faded sweatshirt and a hat to keep the weather away from her hair. She laughed with Sophie when the little girl came by after school, backpack pink and rabbit peeking from the top, and Sophie gave orders from practice for who got the last pancake. The town watched, and, with their watchfulness, offered approval as if it were a small currency exchanging hands. Adam found himself watching how Linda made grilled cheese with the same precise care she had used at the laundromat. Butter, bread, the lean of a spatula that had been sharpened on practice, not polish. Those small domestic competencies accumulated like savings. They mattered more than headlines. Linda did not seek to erase her past. The necklace hung sometimes on a chain around her neck again, not as a badge of a life she'd fled, but as a small thing that belonged to her, a private relic. When she wore it, her fingers would sometimes find the key-shaped pendant and twist it between thumb and forefinger as if testing an old lock. She was not ashamed. She was simply clarifying the terms of her life. Sophie adjusted to the new arrangement with the bright resilience that only children can have. She wrote often about the night a stranger came in the rain and then turned into someone who made pancakes. Her teacher noticed her stories were unusually kind. One essay won a small recognition at school and was read at a morning assembly. The sentence Sophie picked out for the paper's headline read, in a child's careful scrawl, "The night my dad helped a lady." The town applauded, because Westbridge loved second chances as much as it loved pie at the bakery. There were no cinematic confessions between Adam and Linda. There were conversations after closing about rent and spare change, and whether the stand could afford a new waffle iron. There were evenings they washed dishes together, hands in warm soapy water. and the house filled with laughter over small domestic defeats. Their relationship grew not by proclamations, but by repetition. Someone covering the school run when the other worked late. Leaving a kettle heating on a low flame because someone is a creature of tea. A year later, Brookside mornings had a small mural along the side painted by a school art class. A rabbit with a bandaged ear sitting beside a little house. Beneath it, someone had scrawled a sentence in paint that matched how the town liked to tell stories. Home is what you make together. The stand's customers included fishermen who left with wrapped breakfasts at dawn, and the librarian who took a break from shelving to sit with a cup and exchange introductions. Linda had a talent for remembering regulars' orders and for slipping extra napkins into a child's hand with a confidence that made people think of her as a gift, not a headline. On a soft spring morning, Adam watched as Sophie bounded back from school with a short essay clutched in her fist. She presented it to him like an offering, eyes wide and proud. "Dad," she announced, "Ms. Carter read my story. She said it's about the night someone knocked and we were brave. I wrote about how shelter can be a sweater for the soul." Adam felt his throat tighten in a way that had less to do with words and more to do with the accumulation of days. He smoothed Sophie's hair back and read the lines she had written aloud, the child voice punctuating the room like a small bell. Linda stood in the doorway of the stand, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. Her sweatshirt had patches at the elbows. There was a smear of flour on her chin, and when she bent to retrieve a dropped napkin, the sun caught the pendant at her throat and made it wink. For a moment, the world reduced to simple, precise image. 3 figures on a small-town street, a breakfast stand breathing out steam, the mural's rabbit smiling down. They walked home as the drizzle began again, like a continuation of the gentle weather that seemed to bless Westbridge's softer moments. The rain was like a reminder that some things were cyclical, and that water, constant and ordinary, did not always have to be a menace. Sophie trailed behind, rabbit tucked in her backpack, and the pink nightlight in her bag's side pocket blinked against the soft fabric. On the porch, Adam reached for the light switch out of habit and then stopped, leaving the porch light on for a moment longer. It had once been his small superstition to leave a light for the dark. Now the lamp shone on the 3 of them like a domestic benediction. Linda leaned into the rail and breathed in the smell of rain and home. She did not promise grand things. She did not demand any more than the ordinary daily miracle of care. "Does it ever feel strange?" she asked, the question more to the air than to him. "Going from headlines to hamburgers?" Adam looked at the pancake spatula in her hand, the way she wore the work like a quiet armor. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but most of the time it feels right." They stood that way for a long minute, listening to the rain map out a rhythm on the porch roof. Sophie made a small declaration about the rabbit needing a bandage change in the morning, and then declared she was ready for bed. Inside, the nightlight would glow in a small pink circle, while the rabbit watched over dreams. Linda touched the pendant at her throat and breathed out. She did not say anything about the man who had once tried to arrange her life. There was no need. The choice had been made. The consequences had been lived. She had not been entirely free from the past, nobody in Westbridge was, but she had built, slowly and without spectacle, a life that allowed for mistakes, mended things, and pancakes at dawn. Adam thought about the night when a stranger, someone people had feared might be no one at all, had knocked at his door. He remembered the feel of wet hair and a towel, and a voice that had not asked for permission to exist. He remembered the suspicion, and the small, inevitable step past it toward shelter. The story of a possible catfish had been only a rumor. The truth had been a person seeking a quiet place to learn to be herself. On the kitchen counter, the charred toast was long gone, but the memory of it retained its small moral. Sometimes the best things are burned a little, but that doesn't stop them from being good. Sophie tucked her rabbit under her arm and announced she had a dream about a rabbit who became brave because someone believed in him. Adam smiled and tucked a blanket around her, the rhythm of the house holding steady. Outside, rain softened into a friendly sprinkle. The porch light haloed them, and for a fleeting second, the town of Westbridge felt like a place that had room for reinvention. They had been given no guarantees, only the hard, patient work of showing up. That, it turned out, was enough. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes in second chances.